The rain poured heavily in the village of Makoro, as if the sky itself was weeping for what was about to happen. Inside a small, crumbling house at the edge of the village, 17-year-old Zanira sat quietly in a corner, her arms wrapped around her knees. She was a gentle girl with kind eyes and a soft voice, never answering back, never complaining, even when her stepmother, Mamek, shouted at her or made her sleep on the cold floor. Life hadn't been fair to her since her mother died. Her father had remarried quickly, and Mamek had never accepted her. Instead, she favored her own daughter, Tulisa, who was loud, demanding, and always dressed in pretty new clothes, while Zanira wore torn hand-me-downs. That night, Mamek's anger was louder than the thunder outside. "You eat my food, breathe my air, and give me nothing," she screamed, grabbing Zanira by the arm. Tiza watched from the doorway, a cruel smirk on her face. Go and beg on the streets. That's where you belong," Mamek shouted, dragging Zanira outside. The rain soaked her thin clothes instantly, her torn slippers squished in the mud as Mamek pushed her out of the gate. Zanira stood there shivering and heartbroken while the door slammed behind her. No bag, no money, no goodbye, just the cold, cruel night, and a heart full of pain. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't hurt, but because she was used to hiding her tears. Still, something inside her whispered, "This is not the end." The next morning, Zanira walked and walked until her legs felt like they would fall off. Her clothes were still wet from the night before, and the muddy road clung to her, slippers like they didn't want to let her go. She had no idea where she was going. All she knew was that she had to get away from Makoro, away from Meek, away from the pain. By evening, she found herself in Bura, a big, noisy city that smelled like smoke, street food, and dreams that hadn't come true yet. The sky was turning dark again and the cold wind whipped through her thin dress. People rushed past her, busy with their lives, not stopping to see the girl standing alone with red eyes and trembling hands. Zanira looked around for a place to rest. Her stomach growled so loudly it almost made her cry again. In a quiet alley behind a row of food stalls, she spotted an old wooden cart that had one wheel missing. She crawled under it, hugging herself tightly to stay warm. The ground was hard, the smell was bad, and rats ran nearby, but at least no one would chase her away. She tried to sleep, but her body wouldn't stop shaking. Tears silently rolled down her cheeks. Why did they hate me so much? She thought. What did I do wrong? Just then a soft voice called out, "Child, are you all right?" Zanira looked up and saw an old man with kind eyes and a crooked smile. He wore a patched shirt and smelled like roasted corn. "Don't be afraid," he said gently. "My name is Babachillo. I sell food here. Come sit by my stall." Too tired to argue, Zanira slowly crawled out. Babachillo gave her a small wooden stool to sit on and handed her a warm piece of flatbread wrapped in a napkin. "Eat, child. You need your strength," he said. Zanira took the bread with shaky hands and whispered, "Thank you." It was the first kindness she had received in what felt like forever. As she ate, Babachillo sat beside her and placed an old but clean blanket over her shoulders. "I've seen many people come and go in this city," he said, watching the street, some broken, some lost, but I've also seen people rise from nothing and become something this world never expected. Zanira listened quietly, tears still clinging to her eyelashes. "They told you you're worthless, didn't they?" he asked gently. She nodded, too afraid to speak the truth out loud. "Well," he said, patting her shoulder softly, "you are more than they made you believe. Don't carry their lies in your heart. Carry your own truth. That's the only thing that will take you forward." Zanira looked at him, eyes wide. No one had ever said anything like that to her, not even her own father. That night, under the streetlight glow and wrapped in Babachillo's blanket, she didn't feel safe, but she didn't feel completely alone anymore. She was still scared, still unsure, but something inside her had shifted. A tiny spark had been lit. She laid down near Babachillo's stall, her head resting on her arm, and looked up at the stars peeking through the clouds. She whispered to herself, "Maybe I still have something left. Maybe I'm not done yet." And for the first time in a long, long while, she fell asleep with hope. The sun peeked through the clouds the next morning, casting a soft golden light over the busy streets of Bura. The city was already alive, vendors shouting prices, children chasing each other, buses honking like impatient beasts. But in a quiet corner near Babao's food stall, Zanira sat with her knees pulled to her chest, gently rocking back and forth. She wasn't begging. She wasn't bothering anyone. She just sat there, lost in her thoughts. And then, without meaning to, she began to hum. It was a soft, sweet melody, one her mother used to sing when the world felt safe. Her voice wasn't loud, just a whisper carried on the wind. But it had something in it, something real, something that made the heart ache. Her eyes were closed as she hummed. She didn't see the people passing by. She didn't notice the way the world paused around her. Teen was rushing to a meeting at the Bura National TV office when she heard it. She was a woman used to fast cars, big decisions, and bright lights. But the moment that voice reached her ears, her heels slowed. She turned her head trying to find the source. It couldn't be. Not here. Not in the street. She followed the sound like someone chasing a dream. And there, sitting on the sidewalk next to a basket of roasted corn, was a girl in torn clothes with hair that hadn't seen a comb in. Titi's breath caught in her throat. "Who sings like that from the gutter?" she whispered, frozen in place. Zanira didn't notice her. She kept humming, the notes dancing softly from her lips, full of pain and love and memories too big for her young heart. Babao saw Titi standing there and walked over. "She's not a beggar," he said gently. "Just a lost soul trying to find her way." "She has it," Titi said almost to herself. "That thing you can't teach. That feeling, that raw magic." Babaillo smiled and nodded. "She sings sometimes when she forgets the world is watching." Titi stepped closer. "What's her name?" "Zanira," he replied. "She came here with nothing but sadness in her eyes. But her voice makes people stop." Slowly, Titi knelt down beside the girl. "Zanira," she said softly. Zanira opened her eyes, startled. She looked at the elegant woman in front of her, unsure whether to run or stay. "I'm not here to hurt you," Titi said. "I just want to ask you something." Zanira blinked, confused and scared. "Would you sing that song again for me?" Titi asked, her voice kind and steady. Zanira hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the blanket Babachilo had given her. No one had ever asked her to sing before. Not like this. Not with kindness. "I don't sing for people," she whispered. "It's just my mother's song." "Then sing it for her," Titi said. "Sing it like she's listening." Zanira looked down at her hands, took a deep breath, and began to sing, this time with words. The lullaby floated through the air like a secret, wrapping around hearts and pulling tears from eyes that didn't know they could still cry. When she finished, the street was silent. Titi stood slowly, her heart pounding. "Come with me," she said. "I don't know where this will go, but the world needs to hear you." Zanira looked at her stunned. She had spent the last night sleeping under a broken cart. Now a stranger wanted to take her to a place where her voice could shine. She didn't understand it, but something told her. Maybe this was her moment. Maybe this was her beginning. The next morning felt like a dream. Zanira wasn't sure she wanted to wake up from. She stood in front of the big building that said Bura, National TV, staring up at it like it might vanish if she blinked. She had never seen such a place before. Glass doors that opened on their own. People in shiny clothes rushing past. Cameras being wheeled down long hallways. It all felt like another world. Teen Wales stood beside her, calm and confident, dressed in a stylish coat with her clipboard in hand. "Don't worry," she said gently. "Just be yourself. Let them hear you. Not the clothes, not the hair, just the voice." Zanira looked down at her borrowed shoes, too big and slightly scuffed, given to her by a cleaner at the studio who'd heard her story and wanted to help. Her dress was plain and her hair was still a bit messy despite Babacillo's best attempt to neaten it with a little oil and water. But her heart was full of something strong. Fear, yes, but also something else. A tiny, burning hope. Inside the studio, the stage lights were bright and blinding. The seats were filled with people, producers, judges, and crew members who had seen hundreds of hopefuls before. Most of them looked bored, scrolling on their phones or chatting quietly. Another girl in old clothes. What could she possibly offer? Zanira stood on stage, hands shaking slightly. She looked out at the crowd and suddenly felt small. But then she closed her eyes, and in the darkness behind her lids, she saw her mother. She remembered the way her mother used to hold her and sing, softly at night, the way her voice made the world feel safe. So she opened her mouth and sang. At first, just a single note floated into the air, clear, pure. Then came the melody, and her voice began to rise and fall like the wind over a quiet field. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't trained, but it was real. It carried every night she had slept cold, every tear she hadn't cried, every insult she had swallowed, and it reached everyone in the room like a whisper that became a wave. One by one, phones were lowered. Conversation stopped. A cameraman leaned in. A judge put down his pen. The silence was loud and no one dared to break it. When she finished, the last note hung in the air for a few seconds before it gently faded. For a moment, no one moved, and then slowly someone clapped. Then another and another, until the whole studio echoed with applause. Zanira stood frozen. She had never heard people clap for her, never felt what it was like to be seen and valued. Titi was smiling from ear to ear. One of the judges leaned forward and said into the mic, "Young lady, where have you been hiding?" Zanira looked down at her shoes and whispered, "I wasn't hiding. I was just trying to survive." And with that, the room fell in love with her. Not just her voice, but her story, her strength, her soul. That day, Zanira wasn't the girl from the street anymore. She was the girl who stood on a national stage with nothing but borrowed shoes and a broken heart and sang a song the whole world would remember. The next morning, Bora woke up to a storm, but not the kind with rain. This storm came from screens, speakers, and every street corner where people gathered. It was the sound of one name echoing everywhere, Zanira. It started with a single video clip, her audition, just 2 minutes of her standing on that stage singing, with her eyes closed and her soul wide open. Someone from the audience had filmed it and posted it on social media with the caption, "This girl just silenced an entire studio. Who is she?" By the time the sun fully rose, the clip had already been shared thousands of times. TV channels picked it up. Radio hosts played her voice between songs. News reporters called her the mystery voice. Every headline seemed to shout the same thing. From street to star, unknown girl leaves judges speechless. People were talking about her in cafes, in schools, in taxis. Did you hear her voice? Where is she from? She's not trained. They say she lived on the street. No way. That voice is a gift from heaven. Children tried to hum the lullaby she had sung. Elderly women wiped tears from their eyes watching the replay. Even men who never cared for music were moved. There was something in her voice that didn't just entertain. It healed. It spoke to a part of everyone that had ever felt alone, abandoned, or forgotten. Zanira, unaware of the explosion she had caused, sat quietly in a guest room the studio had arranged for her. She held a cup of tea in her trembling hands, still processing what had happened the night before. She had no phone, no mirror, no idea that her face had become the most recognized in the country overnight. Tim Whale burst into the room, phone in hand, face glowing with excitement. "Zanira, you don't understand. You've gone viral. Everyone is talking about you." Every single person Zanira blinked viral. "Yes, you're on all the channels. People are calling you the soul of Bora. Look." She handed her the phone showing post after post. Comments flooded in. I cried listening to her. This girl gave me goosebumps. She's not just a singer. She's a miracle. Zanira stared at the screen in silence. Her own face was looking back at her, glowing under the stage lights. Mi dong. It felt strange. Surreal. They really see me, she whispered. Titi knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. Yes, sweetheart. For the first time, the world sees you. And they don't just hear your voice, they feel your heart. Across the city, people tried to find out who she was. Journalists begged for interviews. Magazines wanted her on the cover. Music producers fought over who would get to work with her. But all Zanira could think about was her mother. Would Mama be proud of me? Would she hear my song from the sky? Baba Chilo, the street vendor, watched the news on a small TV in his stall. He smiled with tears in his eyes. I knew it, he whispered. That girl's voice was too big for the streets. And back in the village of Makoro, a teacup slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the floor. But that moment wasn't ready yet. For now, the world belonged to Zanira, the girl no one wanted, the voice no one could forget. In the quiet village of Makoro, the morning began like any other. Birds chirped lazily in the trees, smoke rose from small cooking fires, and radios buzzed in the background with soft chatter. Inside Mamiki's house, the air smelled of warm tea and fresh bread. Mamie sat at the small wooden table, sipping from her favorite cup, dressed in her usual fine robe, with her gold bangles lightly clinking as she stirred her tea. Tisa, her spoiled daughter, scrolled through her phone with a bored look on her face. Gee. Nothing new, she said, rolling her eyes. Only that stupid talent show again. Everyone's talking about some mystery girl with a big voice. Mick shrugged, not interested. Every year they bring out some poor child to sing and cry. It's nothing special. But just as she lifted the cup to her lips, the TV on the shelf changed scenes. And there it was, a glowing stage, a standing ovation, and then a close-up of the singer's face. The camera zoomed in as the host shouted, "Give it up for the golden voice of Bura Zanira." The name hit the room like a slap. Tisa froze. Her phone slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a thud. That's her," she shrieked, pointing at the screen. Mamaki's hand trembled. The teacup dropped, crashing onto the table and spilling hot tea everywhere. Her face went pale as she stared at the TV, lips trembling. No, it can't be. She was supposed to disappear. The camera cut to Zanira's smiling face, eyes shining under the stage lights, waving shilly at the audience. Her voice echoed in the background from the performance clip. Strong and beautiful. Tisa covered her mouth, shocked. "Mama, she's famous. They're calling her a star." Mamik didn't answer. She was frozen, eyes locked on the screen, her mind spinning. She remembered that rainy night, how she dragged Zanira out of the house like trash, yelling at her to leave, to vanish. She had slammed the door and thought that was the end of her. A poor, unwanted girl. How could she survive? But not only had she survived, she had risen. Now the whole country was watching her. The girl Mamik had called a burden. The one she had left out in the cold with nothing but torn slippers and old memories. "Mama," Tisa said, voice trembling. "What if people find out? What if they know what we did to her?" Mamik's hands clenched into fists. "No one will know. We say nothing. We don't talk to anyone. She's gone. She's not our problem anymore." But even as she said it, her voice sounded weak. She knew the truth. The world was falling in love with Zanira, and sooner or later the truth always comes home. Outside, a few neighbors were already gathering around their own radios and TVs. They pointed, whispered, some already connecting the dots. "Wasn't that Mamik's stepdaughter?" one woman asked. Inside the house, Tisa backed away from the TV, guilt creeping into her chest. "She looked happy," she whispered. "She didn't even look like the same girl." Mommy didn't respond. She sat quietly, staring at the broken teacup, the spilled tea running like a river across the table. The same river of regret now rising inside her. And on the TV screen, Zanira smiled, not out of revenge, but because finally she had found something no one could take from her. A voice, a place in the world, and a story that was just beginning. The lights were soft in the studio that evening. The host sat across from Zanira, smiling gently, but everyone in the room could feel the tension, like something important was about to happen. The cameras rolled, and millions of eyes across Africa watched their screens. For days, people had been talking about her voice. Now they were about to hear her truth. Zanira sat quietly at first, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple dress, nothing fancy, but her presence was powerful. Her eyes looked calm, but deep inside her heart was racing. This was not just another interview. This was her moment, to speak for every girl who had ever been made to feel small. The host leaned forward. Zanira, your voice has moved the world, but many still don't know where you came from. Would you be willing to share your story? Zanira nodded slowly. She took a breath and then with quiet strength began to speak. I was born in a small village called Makoro. My mother died when I was very young. She was the only person who ever truly loved me. After she passed, I lived with my stepmother and her daughter. Things changed. I was no longer treated like family. I became invisible. Her voice trembled for a second, but she didn't stop. I was given the leftovers, the broken shoes, the smallest blanket. They told me I was nothing, a burden, a mistake. And one night in the rain, they threw me out. No bag, no food, not even a goodbye. Gasps filled the studio. The host's eyes watered. Viewers watching from home leaned closer to their screens. Many, holding their breath. I walked for hours, Zanira continued. I ended up in the city of Bura with no place to go. I slept under a broken cart. It was cold. I was hungry. I cried until I had no more tears. But I didn't break. Something inside me, maybe my mother's memory, kept me going. She smiled softly, remembering. A man named Babachilo, a street vendor, saw me. He didn't ask questions. He just gave me bread and a blanket. That was the first kindness I'd felt in years. I will never forget it. The host wiped away a tear. And your voice, when did you discover it? Zanira looked up. My mother used to sing me lullabies. I remembered one and started humming it just to comfort myself. That's when Miss Titi heard me. She didn't laugh at me. She didn't judge my clothes or my dirt-stained face. She just listened. She saw something in me. She paused, then added, that's when everything changed. The studio was silent. Not a single sound. Even the cameramen were still. Zanira took another deep breath. I want people to know that pain doesn't have to be the end. That even if the people who should love you turn their backs on you, kindness from strangers can still save your life. The host nodded, voice shaking. You are a miracle, Zanira. The interview ended with a standing ovation from the studio audience. Across the country, thousands of messages flooded social media. People cried, people shared, people told their own stories of survival and pain. Zanira's truth had gone viral. But not because it was shocking, because it was real. And because in a world full of noise, her voice, soft, strong, and honest, was something the world had been waiting to hear. The sun was bright over Makoro as a line of cars slowly made their way through the narrow village road. Children ran barefoot beside them, waving and laughing, their eyes wide with excitement. Something big was happening, something the village hadn't seen in years. At the center of it all sat Zanira, looking out the window of a black SUV, her heart pounding. It had been months since she'd left Makoro with nothing but torn slippers and pain in her chest. But now she was back, not broken, not angry, but stronger than ever. Not for revenge, but for something far more powerful. As the cars stopped, near the old village square, people gathered, whispering and pointing. Is it really her? She came back. That's Zanira, the one from the TV. Zanira stepped out, dressed in a soft green dress, her natural curls tied back, her smile warm. She looked around at the place she used to cry in, the road where she once begged for kindness, and now she stood tall, not as a victim, but as a voice. Behind the crowd, Mamik watched from her doorway. Her face was tight, her eyes dark with fear and shame. She didn't come forward. She just stood there half hiding behind her curtain, remembering the night she threw Zanira into the rain. Tisa stood beside her, dressed in new clothes, makeup carefully done. She smiled nervously, hoping Zanira would notice her, maybe even wave. But Zanira didn't look their way. She walked straight to the small hill beside the schoolyard. A microphone was waiting for her. She took a deep breath and looked out at the crowd. Old neighbors, teachers, children sitting cross-legged on the grass. "Thank you for coming," she began softly. "Many of you knew me when I was just the quiet girl living in Mamik's house. Some of you saw me walking barefoot in the rain. Some maybe looked away. And that's okay, because today is not about the past." She smiled as the crowd leaned in, listening closely. "I came back to give something that I never had when I needed it most. A place to feel seen, a place to sing, a place to be safe." She turned and pointed to a covered structure behind her. A large cloth was pulled off, revealing a beautiful new building. Bright blue walls, wide windows, and a sign that read, "Zanira's music home for every child with a voice." The crowd gasped, and then clapped louder and louder. Some even cried. The children jumped up shouting her name, "Zanira! Zanira!" One little girl ran to her and hugged her tightly. "Will you teach us to sing?" she asked. Zanira knelt down, smiling. "Yes, baby, I'll teach you everything I know." In the background, Mimiki sat down quietly on her step, her hands shaking. She didn't know what hurt more, the shame or the kindness she didn't deserve. Tisa tried again, to wave. "Hi, Zanira," she said softly, smiling. But Zanira simply looked past her, not in anger, not in hate. She had just moved on. Because the truth is, some wounds don't need revenge. They heal when you become more than what they tried to destroy. And that day, as the village clapped and the music school doors opened, Zanira proved that even the girl, thrown out like trash can, returned as treasure. The city of Bora had never seen anything like it. That night the sky was full of stars, but none shone brighter than the one standing on the stage. Zanira, her first live concert titled From Street to Song, had sold out in hours. The stadium was packed with thousands of fans, cameras flashing, and the world watching from their screens. But even with all the lights and cheers, Zanira stood there with tears in her eyes, not because she was scared, but because she had never imagined this moment could be real. The stage was beautifully set with soft gold lights and a large banner that read to the forgotten girls who were told they'd never matter. Every little detail was her idea. She had planned it all for one reason: to sing, not just for fame, but for healing. As the music started and the crowd began to cheer, Zanira stepped forward slowly, holding the mic close. The audience went quiet. Everyone was waiting. Her voice filled the air like a warm wind, soft, deep, and full of emotion. She started with the lullaby her mother used to sing, the one that first got her noticed on the street, and as she sang, people wept, not just because of the melody, but because they felt every word. Her voice carried her pain, her hope, her journey. After the first song, she paused. Her eyes scanned the crowd. Then she spoke gently into the microphone. "When I was thrown out on the street, I thought my life was over. I thought no one would ever see me or hear me again. But the silence gave me something else. A voice. A voice I didn't know I had. And tonight I sing for every girl who's ever been left behind, for every child who felt invisible. You are not forgotten. Your story still matters." The crowd roared with applause. But she wasn't done. She continued, "Your worth isn't measured by the love you didn't receive. It's measured by the strength you find in your darkest moment, and the voice you find in the silence." A soft gasp swept through the stadium. Some held their hands over their mouths. Others closed their eyes, letting her words sink in. She went on to sing more songs. Songs about broken hearts, about survival, about mothers who live in memories and strangers who show unexpected kindness. Each note told a story, each lyric wrapped around someone's pain like a gentle hug. In the front row sat Babao, the street vendor who once gave her bread and a blanket. Zanira saw him and smiled through tears. She pointed to him during one song and said, "You saved me before the world knew my name." He stood and clapped, wiping his eyes. In another corner of the stadium, Mamik and Tisa sat quietly. They had come, invited by Zanira's manager, but this time there was no anger, no shouting, just silence. Mamik watched the stage with heavy eyes, realizing the girl she threw away had become someone the whole world now loved. The final song of the night was called "Rise Again." And when Zani sang the last line, even from the coldest ground, a flower can still bloom. The stage exploded with golden lights and gentle firework. People stood clapping, crying, cheering. Zanira bowed her head, not just in thanks but in peace. She'd finally made it, not to the top of the charts, but to the hearts of those who needed her the most. The night sky over Bangor exploded with fireworks, painting colors across the dark clouds. Thousands of people stood with their eyes lifted, cheering and clapping. But the biggest moment wasn't in the sky. It was on the giant screen at the center of the stadium. Bold letters appeared in gold light. Zanira, Africa's sole voice. People screamed with joy. Some held up banners, others wiped their tears. News reporters shouted into their microphones, "History is being made tonight." Cameras flashed, recording every second. Social media flooded with her name. From village radios to city billboards, from little huts in Makoro to skyscrapers in Bura, everyone knew who she was now. Backstage, Zanira stood quietly, looking at the crowd. Her heart was full. She had been broken, thrown out like trash, left to sleep on cold streets. But she rose. She didn't just survive. She shined. And now the whole world was watching. Not with pity, but with admiration. Far away, in Makoro, Mamika sat in front of an old TV, her hands trembling as she watched the broadcast. Tisa sat beside her, frozen in silence. The girl they had called useless. A burden was now the voice of a continent. Regret filled the room like smoke. Mamiki said nothing. She couldn't. Words had failed her, just like love had failed Zanira. But Zanira had found something stronger than hate. She had found her voice,